Hello and welcome to the CX Files for 17th November 2022. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. Mark, great to talk to you. And we have got a very interesting episode this week that I think is going to be very salient for those of us who are planning holiday season travel, whether it's Thanksgiving in the States or those of us who are planning on making our way to different venues over the course of the December holiday season.
Yeah, and both of us are traveling next week as well. While we are actually recording this, I'm in Brazil, you're in Canada, but the day that this goes out, I think both of us are actually going to be in London.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting, Mark, is that we caught up this week with a longtime friend of the podcast, one Mr. Chris Gillen. Now, Chris is the leader of A Closer Look, which is a market research agency that focuses on a lot of different verticals. But one of the key verticals that they put under the microscope regularly is travel, hospitality, and leisure. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Chris was because obviously individuals who have been traveling, who have been visiting restaurants or staying in hotels the past several months have raised a lot of concerns about the level of CX that they have been faced with, and not in a good way, I might add. Equally speaking, we wanted to get Chris's take on where things are actually going to go, what he anticipates are going to be some of the key elements moving into the end of this year, especially as everybody starts ramping up for Thanksgiving as well as for Christmas, as I mentioned previously. It was a fascinating 15 to 20 minutes, as it always is with Chris. He's based in Atlanta, and we not only talked about some of the trends that A Closer Look is picking up, but also some of the experiences that both Chris and I have faced over the course of the past several months. And Mark, if I'm perfectly honest with you, generally speaking, the travel has ramped up for me, as you know, and as many of our listeners know, but I've really not been faced with anything that's overly cumbersome. My experiences have generally been not too bad. And I think you're generally the same, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, since the pandemic, I know the travel industry has been ramping up again, and there's been constant sort of disaster stories in the media. But personally, I haven't faced any problems like that.
No, and Chris and I talked about this. We compared notes, and we also talked about what travelers, what people who are consumers of services and products in the hospitality and leisure space should be anticipating, not just even to the end of the year, but just moving forward indefinitely. And the expectations are going to be very different based on what Chris's research is showing, and effectively what companies in the travel, hospitality, and leisure space are prepared to offer. You know, I think that for many of us, the days of going up to a check-in at a reception of a hotel are going to be done. It's going to be completed online or using an application. There's going to be a lot more self-service involved when visiting a restaurant. Obviously, in the airline industry, this has become much more of a thing. And something that Chris touches on in our interview is that nobody should expect this labor shortage to end anytime soon. We should be prepared to adapt. And I think the biggest thing that came out of my chat with Chris is that we, as consumers of travel, leisure, and hospitality, need to be a lot more proactive. We can't just be relying on companies that we're buying from to provide us with the information we need. We've got to go out and look for it. We can't just rely on them to provide us with some of the more basic elements of service. We've got to be prepared to take that on and to push them forward as well, if it's something that we expect.
Okay, excellent. So why don't we go straight to the interview with Chris Gillen?
The CX Files is really happy to welcome back a longtime friend of the podcast, and that is Mr. Chris Gillen, who is the CEO of A Closer Look. Chris joins us from his home in Atlanta, Georgia. Chris, it's always great to catch up.
Same here, Peter. I'm glad to be back. Thanks for having me again.
Well, thanks for taking the time as always. I know how busy you are. And as a good point of reference, because you're not a first-time guest on the CX Files. We're delighted to welcome you back. But why don't you just maybe refresh our memories a little bit about what is a closer look and what you do as an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. We're a customer experience research data analytics company. We've been around for over 27 years. We serve clients in all verticals: hospitality, retail, senior living, you name it. The primary core of our business is customer data collection. So we do mystery shopping, we do customer surveys, we do a lot of data collection and gathering for our clients. And then we apply some human intelligence and some data analytics to that data to kind of help them understand what I like to say is where they're winning and where their opportunities are as it pertains to their customer. And we're very privileged to work with some of the largest businesses in the United States.
And you do take a big focus on the hospitality sector, which is why we're here to chat today, Chris. And it's interesting because as I think about how 2022 has shifted for me personally, I've been on airplanes a lot more than I have been since March of 2020. I've been eating in more restaurants. I've been staying in more hotels. And if I'm perfectly honest with you, no matter where I've gone, I've generally had very good experiences. I've not been impacted by a lot of the staff shortages that seem to have plagued many travelers over the course of the past several months as things have rebounded in the travel and leisure sector. But can you give me your sense, based on what a closer look has been tracking, how's the recent worry about labor shortages, at least over the course of the start of 2022, impacted customer experience levels in the hospitality and the leisure sector?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad to hear, as I'm sure many businesses are glad to hear, that your experiences have been more favorable. I mean, certainly hospitality was greatly impacted with COVID. Almost all businesses, and I mentioned, we serve almost all verticals. Everybody is experiencing staffing related shortages. It's hard to recruit. It's hard to get people to stay, and they're really feeling the effects of this. I think the bright spot is we do see an uptick. We are hearing from a lot of our clients that hiring, staffing, retention is starting to get a little bit better, which there could be a multitude of reasons for that, but that's a positive. I think secondarily, a lot of companies have figured out how to be more operationally efficient with less staff. And we actually predicted this a couple years ago and said, I think what's going to happen is the staffing shortages are going to fundamentally change the way businesses operate. They're going to have to seek out ways to do more with less, if you will, and be more operationally efficient, changing their model from what it looked like pre-COVID to post-COVID. So we're definitely seeing things get a little bit better. I think you just echoed that. I'm seeing the same thing in travel, where at the beginning of the year I had some pretty poor experiences while traveling. As of late, those seem to be clearing up and getting a little bit better. However, I would say I don't think hospitality in particular is out of the woods yet.
And it's good to have that reality check. And when I think to earlier on in the year, I think to one experience in particular that was especially harrowing, and going into the Montreal airport to catch a flight to Europe towards the end of June, and literally security lines snaking around the airport. And if you had a flight that was within 3 hours, you just weren't going to make it. It was amazing. Now, to be fair, things have improved substantially since then. I've been through the airport several times and not had any issues whatsoever. And I agree that it does look like there are improvements that are being made. Things are getting back to somewhat more of a normal situation. But I'd like to explore a little bit more, Chris, something that you touched on in terms of strategies companies in the hospitality sector have been adapting to in order to improve efficiencies with less staff. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what the impact on the end user is going to be with this approach?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think everybody's got a little bit of a different flavor depending on the business and what they've done and the nature of the business, the type traveler, whether you're, in the airline industry, the hotels or restaurants. But, there's some interesting things. I think, and let's just kind of talk hotels for a minute and hospitality in general. We're seeing a big change in the focus of how they're focusing on cleanliness and cleaning of the rooms. And it's probably not uncommon if you've stayed anywhere now that they've either downshifted the frequency at which they're cleaning rooms, or they're doing some sort of proactive communication to let you know that, if you're there for a couple of days, they may only clean once, or giving you some options to say, if you need fresh towels, this is how you can do that, because they've been heavily impacted. And we've seen overall scores erode a lot around cleanliness standards. And so just shifting the way that they're thinking about how they're facilitating that work with less staffing has been pretty interesting. I will tell you, and that's just an example. I'll tell you the biggest thing, I think, where a lot of companies are really starting to win in this staffing shortage world is proactive communication. And I give you an example. I stayed at a very large hotel chain, and right when I went to check in, they let me know about revised hours for the restaurant and the bar due to staffing. I got an email shortly after reminding me. And so I think what a lot of companies are really starting to understand is, look, this is kind of the new world. I don't know if we can always get away from it, but how we proactively communicate to the customer is really, really important. It kind of sets that expectation, because we think a lot of issues come from the consumer when they're caught off guard or they're surprised, right? So it goes back to that, the cleaning. If I go somewhere and I expect my room to clean every day, get it cleaned every day, and it doesn't happen, then that erodes my experience. If somebody tells me ahead of time what to expect, it changes the nature of the experience. And so that's what we're really starting to see. A lot of hospitality is shifting to, how do we be more proactive with our consumer? How do we get them the information to level set expectations before they arrive? And then they're finding that experience looks and feels better to the customer than it did if they just showed up and, boy, I'm hungry, and the restaurant's closed and nobody told me.
But I love the example of the proactive communications that can be done in the travel and hospitality space. And I'll give you a personal example for me, going back to the airline sector. It drives me crazy sometimes when I'm getting set to board a flight, I'm walking around the airport, and I get my particular airline that I use in Canada quite frequently bombarding me with text messages and emails saying your flight's about to board, or boarding's in progress, or your zone is boarding. And at the same time, it's better to have those levels of proactive communication going on so there's no surprises, especially when something perhaps unfortunate happens. There's a delay or there's a cancellation. It's better than showing up to the gate and finding out the hard way that, yeah, you're going to be stuck in the airport for another 2 or 3 hours, or maybe even overnight.
So true. And, it also kind of, you're also seeing this shift along those lines when we talk about, kind of this proactive communication and to the consumer. You're also seeing a big shift in technology. And I think that's the other component of how companies are really adapting to this new world, is they're relying more on utilization of technology, more self-serve driven things. Being able to check into the room without ever going to the front desk really helps alleviate any issues with staffing, because I'm doing that. And by the way, to tie it in, you're getting that proactive communication. You know what to expect before you actually get there. And so I'm seeing the same thing. I'm seeing a lot more communication directly from the business, telling me, welcome and here's what to expect, so that and the experience is better when you arrive.
So let's talk a little bit about the season that we're coming into. Thanksgiving is coming up in the States in just a couple of weeks. The Christmas season's just around the corner, and I have found that out the hard way walking through shopping malls and department stores in Canada that already have a lot of the Christmas songs playing. I feel sorry for the staff in some of these places. By January, they're just going to be going crazy. But Chris, in your opinion, as consumers are looking to stay in hotels, go to restaurants, get on airplanes in the course of the next 6 to 7 weeks, what should they be anticipating in terms of customer service that they might have expected a few years ago versus where it's likely to be at the end of 2022?
Sure. I think this is going to be a real test for the industry. They didn't handle summer travel very well, as we all know. We read those stories. I think, staffing has gotten a little bit better. I think companies have had more time to implement new technology, new processes in anticipation of the holiday travel season, which everything that I'm reading says people are going to be back. They're going to be out, they're going to be traveling, they're going places. And so I think this is a real test for the industry just to see, have all the things that we've implemented so far this year, are they going to work, and are they ready? So I'm very anxious just to see how that looks through the holiday season. From a consumer perspective, I would tell anybody a couple of key things. One, assume the worst. And I know that's probably a terrible thing to say, but I think if you go into your travel this season, just already preparing that you're going to run into delays, you're going to run into issues, and then pre-planning and being prepared before you travel from a consumer perspective, I think will help minimize the stress. A lot of people over the summer that I talked to that had horrific travel experiences went into it without a plan. They just assumed things were going to be fine and they were going to get to their destination and everything was going to work. And it didn't. So they really were not prepared. Couple that with the fact that the businesses did a really poor job of that proactive communication and letting people know, it created all of that horrible frustration from the consumer's perspective. So, I would hope that it will be a better experience for people traveling this holiday season. I would say assume that there's still going to be issues and problems, and the more that I can plan and prepare for what I'm about to get myself into, things like looking at the wait times at your local airport, making sure that you're downloading the airline's app and you're staying on top of flight times and where things are headed. Have a backup plan. So if things run aground and you get stuck, what are you going to do? I mean, these are all prudent things I think the consumer should be thinking about to try to help mitigate any undue unnecessary stress this holiday season.
Well, you actually preempted my last question around what could be done proactively by the consumer, because I think, historically, we've all been very reliant on organizations that we're buying hospitality, leisure, and travel services from to inform us or to make sure that we're kept as up to date as we possibly can. But now there's so much that we can do as individuals to make sure that we're on top of the situation. And I'll admit, I'm a bit paranoid about this stuff. I always have all the applications on my phone. I'm constantly checking to see if there's any shifts or any changes in schedules, or if there's something that I need to be aware of that I can proactively get in front of. But it's really interesting, Chris, in the sense that we're now at a point where it's almost, dare I say, a partnership between the consumer and the hospitality, travel, and leisure organization from which they're buying services, isn't it?
Oh man, I love that. It is. I mean, it absolutely is a partnership. And I mentioned this shift in technology, and you can see this in many different areas where it is becoming more self-serve. They are pushing more back on the consumer to do certain things or complete certain things. And so that really is a partnership. I have to do my part, the business has to do their part, and you hope that both come together and make it a seamless experience. But you're absolutely right, Peter. And I just think this is at least for the foreseeable future, the way that consumers and businesses begin to work together is the consumer does their due diligence, for the services they're procuring through the business. The business makes sure that it has proper processes and protocols to keep the consumer informed, and they kind of hold hands and go on this journey together.
Well, it certainly looks like it's going to be an interesting journey, not just literally, but figuratively, for the travel, leisure, and hospitality space. Chris, as always, it's a pleasure having you on the CX Files. I think you bring to the table a tremendous amount of insight, not just in terms of where we are, but where we're going. And we look forward to having you back sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Peter. Always a joy to be on.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.